Okay, Nana, thank you. Nana, our constitution has been in existence for, I think, 30,
Yes.
more than 30 years now. Within that period, we've not really had a lot of amendment. I remember one amendment that we did was on citizenship.
Yes.
Where we were able to now allow dual citizenship. 30 years now. This is a question that might sound a bit controversial, but 30 years now, do you think our constitution has served its purpose? And as of now, is it fit? Is it fit for purpose
to
at this time?
answer that question, we have to ask what were the basic elements which were to inform the writing of the Constitution. This is what I've mentioned to you.
Exactly.
A free media, free judiciary, members of parliament elected by universal adult suffrage, a president elected by universal adult suffrage. They didn't accept the prime minister thing. Oh, I didn't mention that. They didn't accept the idea of a prime minister and executive president because they thought there shouldn't be two lions in one hole, which of course is simplistic assessment of the situation. So if you look at the fact that these basic liberal constitutional principles were embedded and have in fact been actually translated into action and have earned us this enviable reputation of being an oasis of constitutional and democratic stability in a very turbulent region, you cannot say that the Constitution has not served its purpose. It has certainly served its purpose. This does not mean that everything is perfect. So that's the first point I would like to make. The second point I would like to make is that I feel strongly that when you think of amendment, you should not merely think of the language, the text of the Constitution. You should think of the tenets of Constitution, the values that accompany it. It is my strong belief that merely amending the text without a complete, evaluation or reassessment or reorientation of our constitutional tenets and values will never achieve what we want. Because whenever there's a loophole, and many experts have said, oh, let's fill the loopholes will be exploited against these principles towards a more sort of partisan end or towards the aggrandisement of power and so forth, unless you are restrained by something. Let's take the very simple case of accepting the results of an electoral process. I did not see any constitution which says that people must accept the results. Constitutional provisions are there for giving validity to the parties and people who win elections. But if somebody says, well, I don't accept this man as my leader and so forth, there really is no constitutional provision. What governs this is a democratic or constitutional value, that in a liberal constitutional system, this is something that you do. So I do not, as somebody who has been involved in constitutional making, I do not think that all possible contingencies can be covered in a constitution. I've heard people saying that, oh, there should be a regulatory constitution. If you have a regulatory constitution, then you are thinking of legislation, governing very, very detailed parts. If there's no room for the application of common sense, for the application of values, or for the interpretation of the Constitution by the courts and so forth, then you are going to have a very, very, very cumbersome document. And in the nature of constitution making, from my experience, people are in a hurry to make sure that they get the basic principles of the constitutional order. I think that don't just think of the script, changing the script. Now, the other point that I would like to make is that sometimes the expectations of amending the constitutions have been exaggerated. In my humble view, you do not get development by just amending a constitution. you do not get even constitutionalism by amending the text. As I said, it must be accompanied by some inculcation of values. And if you look at the history of many countries, the takeoff, the economic takeoff, did not take place when there was a liberal constitutional order. It's not, and it seems to me that in doing a review and all that, you must think of development and all these things. And for example, let's take a simple case. We have in our system, and that's not part of the Constitution, but we have under the Presidential Transition Act, the idea of all boards of corporations has been more or less removed and being replaced. Now, if we do this, beautifully, and we have, peaceful elections, and then every 4 years we change our ministers and all other officers, and people say we have a nice democracy, it's a very, very nice democratic country. But I submit that that will not necessarily result in development. Okay. Because, in my view, reconstituting these statutory boards takes about a year. Yeah. If you look at all the statutory corporations and the authorities that the president has appointed here, and by the time they are settling in, you are already approaching another cycle, and so forth and so on. So some of our things that we are looking for will not necessarily materialize. Nor do I think, for example, that a strict division between parliament and legislature would necessarily enhance the oversight of parliament. I don't think so at all, because we have experience on both sides. We have the experience of the UK, where all members of, all cabinet ministers have to be members of parliament. And yet, it doesn't stop them from getting rid of their prime ministers. No sooner got rid of Boris Johnson, he resigned, and people followed, even though Boris Johnson was the person who can recommend the appointment of ministers. And also in our own history, sometimes we cite the example of what happened in the Liman period when a budget was rejected. And they said, oh, this shows, democratic, oversight, because this was a parliamentary oversight in operation, because there was a division of parliament between parliament and the executive. If you look at the actual history, what happened is different. What happened was that those members of the ruling party, Liman Party, who had been denied ministerial appointments, were aggrieved. And so when it came to supporting Bennett's project, they just walked out and allowed the opposition to prevail. So the idea that the separation will lead to enhancement because members of parliament look to catch the eye of the president and a lot of the will not necessarily apply, because they are still interested in ministerial appointment, because in our system, that is the next step after parliament. People go to parliament because those who are ambitious, they want to become ministers and so forth. So just dividing the two will not necessarily, but people get very, very passionate about this.